The Constitutional Court today expected to hand down the judgment that's been described as a landmark ruling in a bid to challenge the constitutionality of the amended Electoral Act. The challenge brought by the Association for Independent Candidates and the Build One South Africa Party is challenging the threshold that is set for independent candidates to enter the national election, as well as the number of seats that are available to independent candidates in the National Assembly. Now, the amendment stipulates that the independent candidates can only contest 200 of the National Assembly's 400 seats. Let's get more now on this story, and we're joined by Mr. Bulelani Mkhohlishwa, who is the co-founder and executive director of the New Nation movement. Mr. Mkhohlishwa, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. As I mentioned earlier, you were the originators of this particular case to the Constitutional Court. When you initially took it there, what did you have in mind? What did you have in mind at that time? What did you want the ultimate result to be?
Well, thank you, Xoli. Good morning to you and also to your viewers. Well, when we took up this matter to the Constitutional Court, our desire was that the space was going to be opened up for more players, particularly more legitimate players that are going to be nominated by the constituencies and the people on the ground, because our biggest issue was that for people to go to the national parliament and the provincial legislatures, they could only go via political parties, which was unconstitutional. And I think the Constitutional Court agreed with us. And unfortunately, Xoli, what has happened is that it's almost a draconian, a situation that we find ourselves in. That what Parliament has now delivered and was also signed into law by the President Ramaphosa is even worse than what we had before. So we really commend the ICA and BOSA, for taking up this challenge, almost taking the baton from us, even though we have not stopped, because we're also planning to go back to Constitutional Court to challenge some of the areas as well within the law. So
let's try and drill deeper then into what you are hoping is going to be a favorable judgment to what you initially started. And so part of the outcry has been the number of signatures that need to be obtained by independent candidates in order for them to be legitimate contesters, if you like. So 10,000 signatures, you want that reduced to 1,000 signatures for independent candidates. And that's where the IEC has a problem, because they are clear that this is going to lower the standards. And how is it going to lower the standards? They are clear as well to say that this is going to allow for frivolous participation. And for the ordinary South African listening to this conversation, I think it's as simple as this. Right now, you have so many people who believe that they can be president of South Africa. And in my uneducated opinion, that is exactly what the IEC is talking to say, you've got to try and stop that from happening, and that is what frivolous participation means. Do you not at least agree with what the IEC is concerned about here?
Not at all, Xoli. It's difficult even to justify, that argument. Because if you look at the 2019 general national elections and the provincial elections, there were a number of political parties that actually wanted to contest. And at the time, it was the issue of you didn't even need the 1,000 signatures, because as long as you are a registered political party, all that was required of you was for you to be able to pay the 45,000 rand to contest for the province and the 200,000 rand to contest for national. And I can tell you, there were many political parties that had wanted to contest, but because of the financial resources, they were not able to. So for that argument to be advanced, it really doesn't make sense, because it was difficult, even when it looked simpler for the ordinary citizens who wanted to play a role, in contributing, in changing the trajectory of this nation. So the argument that the IEC is advancing to us is actually a frivolous argument. It really just does not hold any water at all.
Let's look at another aspect that they are pointing out, and this now relates to the ballot paper. They are suggesting that this is going to make that ballot paper even bigger to handle for the voter. So it will end up being a 2-page ballot paper, and again, the main concern for them is that this is going to threaten the credibility of the election. No empathy for them still?
Not at all, Xoli, because I think these barriers to entry are the ones that are actually going to be managing, the size of the ballot paper. And as I said, I think many South Africans, the state of the economy and where people are struggling, as things stand. So it was not going to be easy for people to contest, even if we're using the old rules for people to actually contest the national and the provincial elections. So the issue of the ballot paper being longer, again, for us, it just doesn't hold any water. But what we are seeing playing out here is that the IEC is almost really being an extension of the political parties that are in parliament to actually secure and protect the ones that are already in, because it just looks like political parties that are already represented in parliament who actually want to make sure that this pie, this cake remains to be divided just among them. But any other new and role players who want to come in, they're just making it very difficult for them to be able to do so.
All right, so let's look ahead. The judgment by the Constitutional Court expected at around midday today. In your eyes, what would a favorable outcome look like based on some of the issues we have dealt with?
Maybe before I answer that, maybe let me also just touch on this critical aspect of us having 3 separate arms of state and the separation of powers that exist between those 3 arms of state. So when we're following the court proceedings, particularly Justice Theron was quite emphatic to say, we as the Constitutional Court can only recommend to what Parliament should do, but we do not want to be seen as if we're exercising judicial overreach. So that is why I think to a degree, our expectations are tempered by that element, that even if the Constitutional Court was to rule in any way, because if you go back to our judgment, which was handed down on the 11th of June in 2020, it was very clear as to what Parliament needed to do, but Parliament was still able to run around and change what that judgment looked like. So the judgment today that we think will be favorable would be a judgment that says, Parliament, it is unconstitutional for you to actually create more barriers to entry, because the very intention of the case was to open the space up. So we are hoping that Constitutional Court would say 1,000 signatures and sticking to the old amount of 45,000 and 200,000 for national and provincial would be a favorable judgment for the ordinary citizens.
All right. Thank you very much for that contribution, Bulelani Mkhohlishwa, a co-founder and executive director of the New Nation movement. All right. Hopefully that sets the scene for you as to what you ought to anticipate out of the Constitutional Court a little later today. Well,